So next up is Anjali Deshmukh. Dr. Deshmukh is a fellow at the Program of Regulation, Therapeutics, and Law at Brigham and Women's Hospital and a pediatrician at Boston Children's Hospital. She works on FDA law and drug pricing for children. This fall, she is joining the faculty at Georgia State College of Law and will be teaching administrative and health law.
Thank you for the kind introduction. I am so excited to share my thoughts on drug efficacy and attempt to do it in 8 minutes. It's a topic that I think will become a larger part of the national discussion on drug pricing over the next decade. So when you say drug efficacy, most people think about a conversation that starts, "Doc, this heart medicine isn't working." And figuring out why requires thinking about, is it the right dose? Am I giving it the right way? And all these other rights on the chart. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about when the drug is just minimally effective. And this is extra tricky because of these rights. We can't evaluate efficacy based off of one patient. For example, if I have a heart attack while taking this drug, I can't tell if I would have had 3 heart attacks if it wasn't for this drug, or if the drug did nothing to prevent my heart attack, or if it saved just like 3 cells, but not enough to make a meaningful impact in my life. We would need a clinical trial comparing people with and without the drug to understand that. And that's where the FDA comes in. FDA reviews clinical trial data and determines that drugs are safe and effective prior to approval, or at least they're supposed to. FDA scientists and all humans make mistakes. And we all know when FDA makes a mistake because we get lawsuits. Now, I'm not saying the system is perfect, but I will say that product liability suits provide a mechanism for individuals hurt by an unsafe drug. And by the end of this talk, I want you to be terrified that our national policies allow for approval of minimally effective drugs being sold at high cost, and there is no way to repair the financial industry for a safe but ineffective drug. And I want you to start thinking about ways to solve it. The first question that you're thinking, why would the FDA approve a minimally effective drug? And the answer is HIV. The thalidomide disaster in the 1960s changed Congress and FDA regulations to require drugs to be both effective and safe prior to sales. Courts defer to these FDA determinations quite broadly. The HIV crisis changed the policy goals. A series of laws were passed to get drugs approved faster and to try to save lives, even if we don't know if they work well or not. The court still granted broad deference to agencies and especially their determination of efficacy at the time of drug approval. So the point of that history lesson is that over the last 40 years, Congress and FDA have made a series of regulations to favor faster approval with lower proof of efficacy for certain life-threatening and serious medical conditions. And this cartoon is a theoretical example, but it shows how the programs generally work. Unlike the traditional timeline up here, where clinical trials are conducted for 7 to 9 years prior to approval, the clinical timetable is shortened by either accepting fewer clinical trials, doing the trial after approval, or using surrogate markers like showing a tumor shrinking rather than showing the drug actually prolongs cancer survival. Your second question is, isn't that a good thing? Don't we want earlier approvals of drugs to help people with serious life-threatening conditions? And the answer is yes, if they work well. As standards for FDA approval drop, we have a growing body of minimally effective drugs being sold to patients with serious and life-threatening illnesses. And the second part of this problem is cost. Charging high prices for minimally effective drugs is problematic, especially when they have a life-threatening illness and this drug might be the only treatment available. especially for people with potentially life-threatening conditions. We have to think about the price. Companies don't try to find out what their products are worth, but rather figure out how much they can get for them on the open market. And after an FDA drug gets approved, manufacturers can charge any price without restrictions, even if it was through the accelerated approval pathway, and we don't know how effective they are. Further complicating this picture is the insurance system, which by design spreads out high costs over large groups of people. High priced drugs impose a small financial cost on every American through premiums and taxes. And like this graphic shows, these diffuse costs add up. For example, Biogen's controversial drug aducanumab caused almost every Medicare beneficiary to pay approximately $10 more per month in premiums, and the clinical trial showed really questionable evidence of benefit. So, where does that leave us? Like my artwork, we're aiming for life saving drugs for rare diseases, but end up with a drug that's not quite as good as we hoped. And no one should be paying a high price for that. The fundamental problem with the way our current system handles minimally effective drugs is that we, the purchasers, bear all of the risk. Pharmaceutical companies get paid if the drug works well or not. And with the accelerated approval and faster approval programs, they get to profit while they figure out if it works well. And for drug companies, this is an economic no brainer. To give a sense of just how much this has shifted pharmaceutical research, the breakthrough therapy designation was approved in 2012. And in the last decade, over 11,000 products have applied for it. The FDA granted 450 of them, and over 220 have become approved drugs. So, point three is that there's almost nothing that we can do about it to recoup the millions or billions of dollars paid for a minimally effective drug. In Wyatt versus Levine, the Supreme Court held that state laws are the appropriate place to address the harm caused by unsafe or ineffective drugs. And state law is structured in a way that means drug efficacy almost can't be challenged. Deference to FDA determinations and federal preemption means that when FDA approved drugs as safe or effective, the drug is treated as effective by state courts. And with accelerated approval, even though it's based off of less evidence, that doesn't matter. Judicial deference to agency decisions means that there isn't a great way to re examine FDA decisions. And this creates a problem for minimally effective drugs. FDA rarely withdraws a drug as completely not effective, choosing instead to update the label to include studies demonstrating minimal efficacy. But that leads to the third bar on challenging efficacy. If the information in the label and the doctor prescribes it, pharmaceutical companies have met their duty to warn. And so consumers' recovery is limited by the action of this learned intermediary. And finally, many states limit recovery when the harm is just economic loss. It might be billions in the aggregate, but it's several thousand for any individual. I'm not even including the scientific impossibility of proving a drug is ineffective based off of a single individual, raising issues of who even has standing to sue. And while each one of these roles are reasonable and beneficial for excellent policy goals, put together, they mean there's no way to challenge a minimally effective drug. So, this is the minimal efficacy problem. Ultimately, it's a policy question of how do we weigh the value of increasing incentivizing new drugs against the risk that some of those will be minimally effective. I think we need to restructure this so that selling effective drugs for life-threatening problems, and we share the risk through when drugs are approved through expedited pathways. And I hope my talk inspired you to brainstorm your own answers to this problem to help patients and families with serious illnesses stop paying high prices for drugs that are just minimally effective. Thank you.